Wait, the dangers of empathy? Empathy isn't dangerous. It helps us take the perspective of others, identify with people, understand their emotions, and build rapport. Some people say it's the basis of morals and one way that we can even show care and concern. In fact, isn't the only problem with empathy that we often don't have enough of it? And isn't empathy more important for designers when we go walking about in other people's shoes? While valuable to design practice, empathy has its problems. Empathy is not necessarily bad, but neither is it all good. Recently, empathy has come under scrutiny. Psychologists, cognitive scientists, and philosophers are re-examining its place as a singular force for good. Designers are too, slowly.
I'm here to call bullshit on empathy in design and research, with love. Because the stakes are high, I want to suggest to you that there's less empathy in user research today than there should be.
Even design legends are questioning the limits of empathy. Don Norman's Why I Don't Believe in Empathetic Design challenges the notion that empathy can make us think we can comprehend how others feel and what they think. Let's be clear. We're not saying empathy should be removed from our design processes. In fact, quite the opposite. In most situations, a genuine and durable empathy is just what's needed. This talk will explore what empathy can actually do and, more importantly, what it can't. We'll identify some limitations of empathy and then briefly investigate how these limitations can be enhanced by two emotive capacities, care and curiosity. In December 1937, Walt Disney was anxious about his first feature animation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The vision Disney cast for Snow White had never been done before, a feature-length, story-driven animated film. Critics were convinced it would fail. On opening night, Disney had no idea how the audience would respond.
Tell us a little bit about this picture, will you?
Well, it's been a lot of fun making it. We're very happy that it's being given this big premiere here tonight. And all these people are turning out to take a look at it, and I hope they're not too disappointed.
Well, I'm sure there won't be.
Would the 83-minute film resonate? Well, the audience gasped at the opening shots of the Queen's castle. They hissed disapproval at the evil Queen.
Who is the fairest one of all?
Actors Clark Gable and Carole Lombard cried when Snow White died. Scared kids had to be carried screaming out of Radio City Music Hall. And some even wet their pants from terror. Kids, that is. Why? Well, of course you know. It's empathy. The audience was so able to identify with Snow White that they felt similar powerful emotions. Writers, storytellers, and musicians understand how a dramatic storyline can arouse empathy. Do designers? Let's take a moment to explore what empathy is. Empathy includes several responses we have to others. This includes cognitive empathy, where we're mentalizing and identifying what others feel. Cognitive empathy can actually make us better communicators. There's emotional empathy. This is where we're sharing the emotions of others, and in some cases, their personal distress. This kind of empathy helps us build connections with others around us. Empathic concern helps us seek to improve the experiences of others. Some people label this as compassion. This kind of empathy drives us to action. And finally, there's motor empathy. This is an automatic response where we mirror bodily position, movement, and language. It's thought that the yawn contagion is an example of this. This empathy helps us develop cognitive and emotional empathy. Our empathy is elastic. Our capacity to empathize can stretch to any of these components depending on the situation and ourselves. But we also may not read things right. A smile can mean joy, but it can also signal sadness. Matching another's state doesn't mean we're understanding what that experience is like for them in their shoes. It's also worth noting that there's no consensus on the definition of the term empathy in psychology and neuroscience. Definition diversity isn't necessarily a problem, but when there's a mismatch between the way a word is researched and the way it's being practiced, that can lead to overall confusion about its overall efficacy. Whatever kind of empathy we demonstrate, sharing, thinking about, caring about, mimicking, or others not listed here. All forms of empathy require us to partially escape ourselves and gain the feelings of others, their struggles and emotions. Will Graham, the FBI investigator in Thomas Harris's novels and in the TV show Hannibal, has the gift and curse of pure empathy. Graham can sense and interpret the feelings and motives of other people, specifically killers.
What he has is pure empathy. He can assume your point of view, or mine, and maybe some other points of view that scare him. It's an uncomfortable gift, Jack. Perception's a tool that's pointed on both ends.
That bit about empathy being pointed on both ends we'll discuss in a moment. An underlying facet of empathy is our ability to take the perspective of others. If we don't take the perspective of others, we set the table for confusion. The kind of practical empathy that Indy Young describes in her book requires us to shift our naturally egocentric center of gravity to another person. Without empathy, we can look at the same thing as another person and see things they don't see at all, unless we take their perspective. Empathy's power is that it allows us to view a situation from multiple perspectives. But perspectives are more than just seeing. We're understanding not just what a person's seeing, but also their feelings, attitudes, and experiences. True empathy offers a relational web of information, their significance and meanings. We have to suspend ourselves in webs of significance that others have spun. The question empathy should help us answer is not just what people do, but what they mean. Ever seen Citizen Kane? We don't know what Charles Foster Kane meant by his words, Rosebud, until the very end of the movie, moments before it's destroyed. You see, empathy is asymptotic. Just like a line that approaches another that never fully intersects, we approach an understanding of those around us, but we never truly feel or understand what they feel in the way that they say it, which leaves things open to misunderstanding and misinterpretation. We're not feeling what others feel, we're feeling what we think they're feeling in our own way. And this is the critical difference. Marcel Marceau's The Mask Maker powerfully portrays a mime who tries on different masks. Showing a variety of different emotions. When the mime puts on a laughing mask, it gets stuck on his face. He tries desperately, but it won't come off. The mime has to blind himself to take it off his face. Marceau's mime demonstrates an unfortunate feature of empathy. Empathy is pointed on both ends. We can feel what others feel, but taking on the feelings of others has a reciprocal effect on us. Because of this, we'll sometimes avoid situations that require empathy. It's a way of avoiding difficult emotions or even burnout. Ever change the channel when an uncomfortable commercial comes on? These negative consequences of empathy, like emotional avoidance or burnout, are one example of empathy's limitations. There are others. Let's explore empathy's topography first. As it channels out from us, empathy gives most of its potency to those who are most similar to us, less of its power to those who are dissimilar to us, and even less to society or the world at large. Here's an example. Ever been to another city only to discover a person, someone from your own town? Did you have a feeling of connection to that person? Our empathic capacity changes when a person moves inside each of these circles. Within these 4 regions are 16 limitations of empathy. There's not enough time to go through all of them, but you can take a look at a resource that we've provided. Each limitation affects us differently. Some may affect us more than others. Others are situation or context dependent. Some may pop up only in our professional work, other limitations in our personal lives. I alluded to one of the limitations earlier. We choose to whom we extend our empathy. Of course, this makes sense. If we were continually in tune with the emotions of people around us, we would be quickly exhausted by that. So we naturally spotlight on specific individuals. This spotlight effect is also a form of selection bias. Empathy narrows rather than widens our view. That spotlight effect isn't very large, and it allows us to focus only on certain people. This helps us understand those under the spotlight, but can lead to insensitivity to those outside of it. Empathy is nearsighted, myopic, and that can have long-term consequences. If we're not careful, we can neglect certain types of users, stakeholders, or anyone else who's unlike us. Another limitation of empathy is that it tends to be discussed in a neurotypical way, with little attention given to neurodivergence. In fact, empathy manifests differently for neurotypical and neurodiverse individuals. Damian Milton calls this the double empathy problem. This happens when there's a mismatch between the two empathies. Because neurotypicals demonstrate empathy in ways that are distinctly different from those who are neurodiverse, from conversation styles to how they view the world, there's a disconnect, which leads to difficulty interacting, which in turn leads to further misunderstandings. In other words, neither sees each other's empathy as empathy. Empathy in design thinking is generally manifested and investigated in neurotypical ways, with little thought or attention to what empathy might look like for neurodivergent individuals. And in fact, empathy is also culturally embedded. In the microculture of design thinking, empathy tends to manifest as largely Western, with Western values, morals, and expectations. The last limitation that I'll talk about is, to me, the most dangerous. That having empathy can sometimes lead us to asking fewer questions, giving us an illusion of understanding. When we recognize the emotions of another, we may believe that we understand what they're feeling, when in reality we don't. To me, this is the most dangerous limitation of empathy. Saying or thinking, "I understand," too quickly can prevent further question asking. In fact, approaching any situation with the mindset of "I don't understand," or "I don't fully understand," leads to more thorough exploration. Now, this is all quite dense. To help unpack this, Meah Lin will present 3 short, practical case studies that illustrate some limitations.
Thanks, Cassini. Hi, I'm Meah. I'm a graduate interaction design student, and I'm interested in good questions over convenient answers. Like Cassini mentioned, we are not proposing to get rid of empathy in design. Instead, we want to recognize the limits of empathy, start conversations around these limits, and together we can address these limits. In this section, I'm going to share 3 short case studies with you. I'll start by sharing a story of mine. The Astro 1 space mission launched in December 1990, 4 years after the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. In the wake of the disaster, NASA underwent a cultural transformation that went from prioritizing launch date to prioritizing safety. In spring 2022, my cohort of graduate students and I envisioned innovative ways to experience a space mission exhibition to spark curiosity and engage the human senses. We worked with retired NASA scientists who created and are currently restoring instruments that were sent into space during the Astro 1 mission. The result of our hard work was 13 storyboards that showcase innovative ways to experience the Astro 1 exhibition in a Smithsonian affiliate museum. During the course of our project, we encountered these limitations of empathy. The document we provided have more details on each of them. Let me highlight one of them and share how we address it in our project. Take a look at this Hermann grid illusion. We see things in our peripheral vision that aren't there. Similarly, there were gaps in our knowledge throughout the project that could lead us to making false assumptions. There's a lot of research on who goes to museums. Many researchers synthesize their insights into personas. Our project focused on engaging museum visitors, getting them excited about the exhibition and information they will learn. Based on our research, we developed a set of personas. But when we showed these personas to one interviewee, He said that none of them represented him. Our early personas of museum goers were either too eager to or too reluctant to engage at a museum, with no middle ground that represented that interviewee. You didn't describe what I wanted, he said. Sometimes doing research leads you to believe that you have covered your bases. Having done interviews and looked at prior research, we felt that we knew our audience. We didn't. Instead, we had an illusion of knowledge. Because of this interview and others, we realized that we missed a large group of people and developed a new and more adaptable set of museum-goer personas that address this group. So, to avoid the illusion of knowledge for your next project, here are a few ideas. What are ways your team can test your assumptions and reveal gaps in your knowledge? Be open to new information. Like the metaphorical procrustean bed that either stretches or chops the sleeper to fit the bed, we can sometimes force information into our current ways of thinking rather than rethinking our mental models and design artifacts. Regardless of what tool you use to crystallize insights from user, if you rely too heavily on the tool, the resulting work can be overly templated, too specific without being useful, and can be based on assumptions. Researcher Amber Westerholm-Smith and designer Carolina Pisato from UK's Ministry of Justice wanted to break down stereotypes, provide complex insights, and help improve decisions that affect the outcomes of people's lives. It might surprise you that they chose personas to do this, but they reimagined this common design artifact. Badly designed personas create stereotypes, not archetypes. And that's particularly crucial because they were designing for some of the most stereotyped groups in our society. Prisoners. Their team was really trying to avoid side-taking and fueling division, which neutralized stereotypes.
Take Orange is the New Black, or Prison Break, or simply look at the tabloids, and you'll see how quickly they are stereotyped. So that makes it even harder for these colleagues in our organisation. They're having to battle these stereotypes that are embedded and engrossed in our society.
While empathy creates connections with others, it can also encourage in-group empathy. The researchers had to be mindful of how they portray the prisoners through their design artifacts. Representing as disempowered or placing value judgments on them will lead to stereotyping and misrepresentation. So the team conducted ethnographic interviews, identifying themes, worked in pairs to avoid biases, and combined narrative, quantitative, and qualitative data. All the things good researchers do. But they avoided side-taking and fueling division by removing information commonly thought essential to personas: images, genders, names, interests, and salaries. Excluding this demographic information avoids stereotyping, especially for this particular population. The end result was 5 personas using Greek gods as archetypical representations that completely steered away from demographic information. This was a radical way to rethink the prison population. When I first learned about this case study, it blew my mind. In many projects, we feel pressure to follow conventions and accept design artifacts as they are. But this team didn't accept what's common as best practices. They came up with iterations of those artifacts that fit their needs. They acknowledged the limits of their empathy and reimagined how personas are made and what they look like. Here are my takeaways from this case study. Whether you use personas or not, in what ways do your artifacts contribute to side-taking and fueling divisions? Be curious and vigilant to find this. Templates are useful but limiting. They are great when we are making cookies, but don't always capture nuances when trying to understand people. Use them as starting points. Finally, how might you need to rethink or redesign your artifacts? Redesigning our tools may seem like common sense, but common sense isn't always common practice. Design has expanded from just screens and interfaces to complex social interactions. As design continues to expand its scope, what would addressing limits of empathy look like when going beyond our current tools, templates, and approaches? Clinton Carlson shared insights from designing for micro-communities using a generative, community-activated, and bottom-up approach that he calls undeliverables. In 2008, Clinton was a designer at World Vision, an international aid and development organization. He designed this poster to promote a North American initiative to raise funds for HIV/AIDS-related work in Africa. Later, his colleagues show him a photo of the same poster now on the wall of a rural Northern African clinic. There was a problem. The poster was designed with an American audience of wealthy donors or political leaders in mind. The poster had no information about HIV/AIDS and depicted a somber image of a grandmother and her orphan grandchild whose parents have died from HIV/AIDS. When our work goes out in the world, our intention doesn't always correspond to its actual use. Clinton shared 5 challenges when designing in cross-cultural micro-community settings. Let's be honest. Researchers can sometimes focus on extracting insights from our research participants, extracting from them what's useful for our project and purposes, leaving behind what's not. This is filtered empathy. To design and research for a community is an exchange. Designing and researching with them is a dialogue. Dialogues are ongoing. Instead of designers and researchers helicoptering in a fully fleshed out solution, purposefully leave gaps in their design process and invite the community to co-design. This is the essence of undeliverables. Community-activated workshops allow people to generate, present, and discuss ideas communally, which can facilitate more equitable conversations towards restorative justice. Rather than a series of in-depth interviews, undeliverables embed researchers in a community which help them avoid filtering empathy, snapshotting, or spotlighting it. Undeliverables shift focus from synthesizing community's output to creating tools and facilitating discussions that benefit the community. Undeliverables strongly resonate with me because it strives to make our work more equitable and inclusive. Here are some takeaways. Be wary of silver bullet design solutions that work like magic. They often make assumptions and bring harm towards micro-communities. And finally, what would design and research look like if we left gaps for the community to fill in? In other words, how can we design so that the community is the expert?
Thanks, Meah. We hope to have unsettled some certainties about empathy with this talk. We also understand that in a world of infinite possibilities, addressing these issues seems impossible. So, how do we begin and how do we keep going? Maybe a quick story. In 2006, 2 Microsoft researchers strongly advised against the use of personas. One of the researchers had created over 200 of them by this point. Subsequent research teams examined these challenges, reflected, and adapted their approaches. In 2015, they responded to that original provocation. Maybe you've used what those teams produced. Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit. The toolkit shows how a large company took seriously the limitations identified by researchers and then reimagined their tools in ways that benefit their users and the company. And in 2023, Microsoft again updated their toolkit. These researchers see their work as a journey. And it's helpful to have a map on a journey, isn't it? We can think of research as a map because maps are useful. Maps provide turn-by-turn directions, and you can always rely on them to know where you are. But over time, things change and the map isn't accurate anymore. We'd like research to be a map, but what we get instead is a compass. A compass provides due north and a direction to move toward, and it's most helpful when we're moving. In fact, for truly innovative work, we don't get a detailed outline of all of the turns or even the dangers along the way. It's only as we move forward do we gain a heightened awareness of our surroundings and perceive how the world changes and understand our place along the way. We hope that this talk and others at the Advancing Research Conference provides not a map, but a compass. We look forward to exploring this territory together with you. Thank you.